I'll make sure she gets it before the end of the day.
Okay, just totally calm me down, okay?
What?
Just totally calm me down, okay?
You too, Jane. Thanks for coming up. Hello. Did you play a sport on it? No.
Why is that okay?
Did you watch the election last night?
I did.
Carly?
I did. I was up well past midnight watching that and the commentary afterwards.
It started at my bedtime. I watched like 5 minutes of it.
I watched like 45 minutes to an hour.
I hereby do certify that if I am now and have been a period of at least 1 year.
Yeah, I had the same thing.
So just leave that blank if you've been here for more than 6 months. That's fine.
Okay.
So I watched it, and I watched the commentary afterwards, and I've been reading a couple of articles. A couple of things that come to mind today. If you were to judge most people that watch the debate, most people that kind of score debate said that Vice President Harris did better at the debate than Trump, but in some polling that was done after the debate, President Trump seemed to gain support that didn't exist before the debate began. So there's kind of a mixed bag of tricks. Katie.
Alyssa had to go to the office and then kind of back.
Yeah. I have a couple of items that I want to hand out. I'm going to wait for everybody to get here today. I am going to give you guys a copy of this now. This is yours to keep. This is a copy of the United States Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. This comes courtesy, Blake, of my friends at Hillsdale College in Michigan. And if you look at the back of this, this is actually signed, girls. Your copy of the Constitution and Declaration, yours to keep. Your copies are signed by you got one or two? Your copies are signed by a Hillsdale College government student. So these are donated to me each year by Hillsdale College. It's a college that I support in Michigan. And this is yours to keep. We will be talking throughout the course of the school year about both the Declaration and the United States Constitution. These are not long documents. They are not long documents. They are very important documents, however. Getting back to what I was just talking about a moment ago before everybody got here, watching the debate last night, mixed bag on the post-debate analysis. Most accounts have Vice President Harris winning the debate, but former President Trump seems to have gained some momentum after the debate in some polling that's been done by CNN and some other polling sources. So we'll see. I don't know if it's going to have an impact moving forward. I can tell you this, there will almost certainly be one more debate After last night, both candidates expressed a willingness, especially Vice President Harris. She wants another debate. I think both candidates we'll see them again in one more debate before the election. Does anybody else have their certificate of residency form completed? Palin, good. Have any of you begun creating a digital account for the Voyager on the Hudson Valley site? Any of you got that done yet?
No.
I got it, Lizzie. Don't sweat it. Don't sweat it. All right.
Sorry.
That's good. Any of you begun creating the digital account? I gave you the instructions for that. Try to get that done before the end of the week. Miss Edgefield, yes.
So last night I was going to make a study Quizlet or something for the vocab, and I couldn't find the vocab words on there. You linked the wrong vocab. You linked I can chat or like the first chapter's vocab. So
Did I link chapter 1?
Yeah.
Just go on the site and just go to the student
So-
site and then the flashcards are right.
If you go to the student site from the digital landing page, it will take you. There's a tab across the top for flashcards, but don't fret. I will link the correct page tonight.
Yeah, I was
Alright.
really stressing
I
because last
copied
night I
mine
was trying to
last
find like flashcards and I really
I will link the correct flashcards tonight. All those flashcards, good question, Palin. All those flashcards will be linked on your Google Stream. In a pinch, if you want to access the digital landing page to find them, you can. But the week that we're studying that particular group of words, I will always have them daily on your landing page. Now, what I did yesterday after school, Alyssa asked a question yesterday in class that I thought was absolutely phenomenal question. What's the difference between a Democrat and a Republican? I have created, actually I've used these with my 7th graders before. This is a packet that basically gives you a group of issues. For example, abortion, affirmative action, death penalty, education, stem cell research, energy, global warming, gun control. It gives you a whole bunch of issues. And on the left-hand side, it tells you how Democrats tend to feel about that particular issue. And on the right-hand side, it will tell you how Republicans feel on the issue. So I'm going to give this to each of you. I'm not going to ask you to do anything with this necessarily right now, but this will be good to have if you want to glance at it to see maybe where you stand on the issues. I would love for you to look at this and kind of get a feel for where you stand on issues that might be of interest to you. Democrats tend to stand one way. If you could pass it down for me, please. Democrats tend to stand one way on most of these issues, and Republicans tend to stand another. Okay, we're missing today who? We're missing Alyssa and who?
No, Alyssa's at the office.
Okay, and Katie's coming back in a moment, so we'll give that to Katie. All right. Next order of business. You guys got your Constitution. You got your student handouts. I'm going to give. Will Alyssa be here today? She will
Yes.
be here. All right, I'm going to do that right there for her. I assigned something last night. Did you guys see the assignment that I posted?
The Ed.
Ed Puzzle video assignment. It should have hit your Google Classroom stream last night after school. So here's what I need you guys to do on that. If you look at your stream, I have posted a very short
It's like 5 minutes.
video assignment on understanding the Electoral College. It should be the second thing down in your stream. If you click the link and go into the instructions, it'll say understanding the Electoral College. It's a 5-minute video clip, and I plainly say I have linked a great video on the EC for you to view. Please complete before Thursday's class period and be prepared to talk about it in class. It kind of reiterates what I explained yesterday with the 269 and the numbers on the board, but it does it in a way that I think is very student-friendly, and it will help make sense of the 51 elections that will take place basically on November 5th. There are 51 elections that will take place across the country, 51 for each state and the District of Columbia. And each state will determine the number of electoral votes that state will apply toward the winning candidate. And what's the magic number, Ava? Who remembers? You got to earn how many electoral votes to become elected president?
270.
270. Half plus one, a majority of electoral votes. So the magic number on election night is 270. Whatever network you watch the election returns on, whatever, once you start seeing a candidate get close to 270, that's the magic number. All right, that's the magic number. And as we get closer to the election, we'll talk more about it. We are not going to do a deep dive today on the debate. I spent too much time yesterday talking about the debating class. I want to kind of get back to the revolution so we can finish our chapter 5. For folks that just walked in late, I will link on your Google Classroom page the correct study deck for this week's vocab. You have one vocab quiz Friday on chapter 5. I think I posted the wrong link. Thanks for pointing that out, Palin. All right. Thanks for pointing that out. We'll get that fixed. Constitution. Democrats and Republicans and where they stand on the issues. Take a look at that, Katie, when you get some time. Ed puzzle assignment, which is due for tomorrow. Have that done before class. We'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow. Does anybody else have their certificate of residency form? Okay, get this into me as soon as you can and get the digital site set up.
We got it.
Thanks, boys.
Yeah.
Get the digital site. You need a pass? Where are you going?
I do. I'm going to study hall. Karen. I'm going to band.
I'll give you a pass.
Thank you.
All right. You going to band with Mr. Allen?
Yeah.
Shane, are you related to Katie, the teacher in the elementary?
No.
No? Here you go. Thank you. Thanks for getting the tape for me. See you. So, back to the revolution and back to what's going on in the 1770s and 1780s. Big momentum changer for the colonies. And I'm not going to call the colonies anymore because actually by 1777 they were the United States. So big momentum changer for the United States, Blake, in 1777 is going to occur in the summer where? What's the big thing that starts to shift momentum and actually will result in the United States earning a new European ally? What event will happen? And it happened locally. Battle of Saratoga. Colonies, the United States wins, and now France is willing to sign on as our ally. That is going to be huge for the United States. France is now willing to aid them militarily. They're willing to aid them financially, with equipment, with supplies, with men and material. That is huge. That is huge in 1777. And I closed class out Monday talking a little bit about the Battle of Bennington. The Battle of Bennington, which occurred over on Route 67 up on the hill, that was part of the Saratoga campaign. What was happening at the Battle of Bennington? A group of British and German soldiers. The Germans were fighting as mercenaries. They were fighting alongside the British. They were moving east from Saratoga toward Bennington in order to find food and supplies for their animals. And as they're moving toward Bennington, they had word of supply warehouses and large farms on the way where they could basically commandeer supplies for their animals. Their animals needed to be fed. And the British and German soldiers are moving toward Bennington. They're not expecting much resistance from the colonists. They're not expecting much resistance, but as they get closer and closer to Bennington and the trips through our neck of the woods in Walloomsac, they come upon militia, volunteer militia from New Hampshire, from Vermont, and from New York that were armed. And the British were not used to seeing and not used to experiencing armed militia members, especially local townspeople. Yes, they were expecting a Continental Army, but they ran into people just with shotguns and with muskets in overalls. Simple farmers, simple local people, your ancestors, a lot of you. I guarantee you, if you're born and raised in this area, any of you, Cottrell Road, right over there by the battlefield, okay? If you could be related. There are people in this community that have direct ties to people that participated in the Battle of Bennington. It was part of the Saratoga campaign. The colonists, the local militia defeated the German soldiers at the Battle of Bennington, which didn't take place in Bennington. It's only called the Battle of Bennington because that is where the British and the German soldiers were headed. Technically, I argued this in 7th grade. What did I say way back when to you all that the battle should be called? Should not be called the Battle of Bennington at all. The Battle of Bennington should 100% be called the Battle of Walloomsac or the Battle of Hoosick because it was entirely 100% fought in New York State. It's called the Battle of Bennington because after the battle and after the United States won their independence, Bennington was hoping to attract people to their area as kind of like a tourist attraction. And because the German soldiers were headed to Bennington, because the German soldiers were headed there to commandeer equipment and animals and food, the Battle of Bennington and the big monument was built to kind of commemorate that, and the name stuck. But in all actuality, in all reality, the battle was fought entirely in New York State and entirely within the confines of our town. All right, so that was important. Battle of Saratoga will happen a couple months later. The British will be defeated at Saratoga, and that battle will mark the real turning point in the war because France will join on as our ally. Now, let's talk about the war in the East moving on after the Battle of Saratoga. I'd like you to go, if you would, girls and guys, to page number 11. And it just dawned on me, Mr. Callahan. It just dawned on me. You are the only guy in this class. So if I say gals, my bad. You guys are no offense. You guys are severely outnumbered. So if I say gals, okay, it's because I'm mostly girls. Okay, that's why I always say guys and gals. But most of the time, I have like a 50-50 blend. Last when I took this class last year, it was probably 50-50. I had Michael Plush, I had Aiden, I had Cole, I had actually it might be more boys and girls. Brady was in class, but this class you guys are outnumbered. All right, so if I say gals and I don't say guys, don't be offended. Majority rules. All right. All right. So we're going to look now at events that take place in the East, and we're fast forwarding to page 11 of our PowerPoint. After the Battle of Saratoga, okay, the British are going to make a change. They're going to replace General Clinton with General Howe, rather, with Clinton, and we're going to see Washington lay up in the winter of 1777 and 1778 at Valley Forge. We saw a video earlier in the week about his experience there. The soldiers faced perilous conditions. The soldiers faced frostbite. The soldiers faced dysentery. The soldiers faced smallpox. But Washington is able to kind of put it together. Washington is able to get the train with the help of Baron von Steuben, the Prussian general. And Washington, yes, Payne.
At this time period, was there like actually set towns, like, or was it like kind of like a rural area?
Yeah, there were towns. There were, in 1777, 1778, big cities were big by standards then, but they're not big by today's standards. For example, the largest city in the American colonies for the longest time was Philadelphia. Okay, and at the time before the war, Philadelphia might have had 30 or 40,000 people. Okay, we're not talking cities like with millions of residents. We're talking the largest city in the South would have been Charleston, South Carolina, with maybe 15 or 20,000. Okay, but certainly there were towns, and certainly there were towns that were incorporated, small villages. But by 1778, at Valley Forge, Washington and his men are there to, again, we talked about armies tended not to do what during the winter months? Fight. They tended to, and this is not a forever, it's not a forever rule. There are exceptions to it, but generally speaking, during this time period, if armies could stop fighting in the wintertime, they would, because fighting and moving and traveling and transporting and getting soldiers fed and housed and clothed properly in the winter months is very challenging. So von Steuben is going to help Washington at Valley Forge. He is going to solicit the help of the Marquis de Lafayette, a young French volunteer who Washington initially distrusted, but who proved himself loyal and proved himself actually very, very valuable to Washington. Washington will write about him later in life, about how he was one of his trusted advisors. Both of these men are foreigners that are signing on board the American Revolution with an opportunity to help the United States in their fight for independence against Great Britain. So the war in the East is going to result in the Valley Forge encampment. What did we say specifically was Washington's chancy, huge risk that he took that he would actually benefit from, the American Army will benefit from? The inoculation with smallpox. Yeah, that's right. The risk of basically giving his entire army a small dose of the smallpox virus with the hopes of inoculating, and it works. Okay, and it works, and they come out that spring of 1778 stronger and better trained. Not only are they healthier physically because they don't have to contend with the smallpox virus, but now, because of von Steuben and the training that they're getting at Valley Forge, the Continental Army, again, we're not talking militia, we're not talking volunteers. Washington's Continental Army of professionals are now much, much stronger and in a much better position to ramp up fighting now that 1778 runs around. So what I'd like to do next is I would like to talk a little bit about, if you guys could go to the next slide, actually. Slide number 12.
War in the West.
War in the West. I want to talk briefly about the West. And when we talk about the West, we're not talking California, Washington, Oregon. When we talk about the West during this period, we're talking about the area west of the Appalachian Mountains and south of the Great Lakes. We're talking about the area that was considered the old Northwest, or the old American West, the area south of the Great Lakes and west of the Appalachians. Today, it's Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Illinois. Some fighting will take place in that, and I want to talk a little bit about that moving forward. From our reading, who can tell me, Katie, from our reading, what role did Native Americans play, and what was kind of unique about Native American tribes in who they supported or who they didn't support during the span of the Revolution? If you had to describe who the Native Americans helped in a sentence or two, could you, and how would you describe it?
Most of them side with the British, I want to say.
She's correct. Most sided with the British.
Because they were hoping that it would push the colonists out and Native Americans would be able to keep more of their land.
Native Americans trusted the British more because they feared that they felt that the British were less a threat to their land. That's correct. Add to that, Palin. Why might some Native American did any Native American tribes support the Americans? Yeah.
Like a lot of them were more like in the middle than they were to like both sides, but like they gravitated towards the British more.
They gravitated toward the British. That's correct, but there were examples, especially here in the Northeast, where you had a tribe in Massachusetts that actually fought alongside American soldiers. They had their own regiment, the Mohicans. All right, the Onondagas, the Algonquins. Is that what you said? Generally speaking, though, Native Americans were distrustful of both sides, and they would have reason to distrust both sides because both sides during the conflict, both sides during the war, while wanting Native American help, okay, while wanting Native American help, both sides in the war were looked on with suspicion by Native Americans. Okay, Palin.
Why did they trust the British more than like their own people? Like,
The Native Americans did not look at the American colonists as their own people. The Native Americans looked at the white European settlers, the colonists from Boston, the colonists from New Hampshire, the colonists from the 13th. They looked at them as a threat because when American colonists came from Britain, what was the what would be a symbol of success for a colonist who came here from England? What would be a status symbol for all American settlers who came from England would want to obtain? If you came from England, you wanted what? Money and gold were in the form of what? Land. Land was what was valuable. And the reason the British were trusted more than the Americans, colonists, because if the British, the American Indians recognized that if more American colonists came from England and settled in the 13 colonies and began to move west, Native Americans could see the handwriting on the wall. They recognized that if British lost and more colonists came from England, they realized that what was going to happen to their land? It was going to evaporate. It was going to be taken away, or they would get pushed off their land. And that's absolutely what will happen. So Native Americans sided with the British, but they kind of covered their nose and sided with the British in a way that wasn't really 100% something that they wanted to do. I think I used the phrase on Monday. They chose the lesser of two evils. They looked at the British as the lesser of two evils. And I want to talk a little bit about the role that they played. Here you have Iroquois and Loyalists. Now, the Iroquois was a tribe located in our geographic region here. This 19th century painting by Alonzo Chappell depicts Iroquois warriors joining Loyalists in a 1778 battle. Really, really important thing happened in our neck of the woods, too. I want to share this with you. You will not read this in your text, but it's important. It's an interesting little anecdote about something that happened here. During the American Revolution, as the British were coming south, they used Native Americans as scouts. They used Native Americans to help them navigate the land as they were moving south from upstate New York. And there was a situation that happened in Fort Edward, which is a little bit up north toward Lake George. There was an Iroquois. There was an Iroquois tribe from that area that was an Iroquois soldier that was serving as a guide, and he came upon a woman who was either the wife or the girlfriend of a British soldier and a loyalist. And this Native American attacked this woman and raped and killed her. And it was pretty ugly. It was a horrible situation. And when the colonists in New York and Vermont found out about it, they basically sent out a warning to everybody that this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen as the British soldiers come into your communities. Start hiding and protecting your daughters, start hiding and protecting your wives, or else, and you use this woman as an example, this is what's going to happen to your wives and daughters. And as a result of their rhetoric, as a result of their propaganda on this, it actually served to align the colonies deeply against the British as they're marching. And it actually would lead to more and more people taking up arms against the British here in New York. If I could find that lady's name and maybe a video clip on her for tomorrow, I'll find that. But for now, just understand that I want you to know that the English, the British, and the Americans both wanted the help of Native Americans, but most Native American tribes are going to side with the British because they pose less of a threat. All right. Now, I want to read the notes on this slide. This is important. At the same time, major battles were being fought in the colonies on the Atlantic. British soldiers were stirring up Native American forces in the Ohio River Valley. So the British are basically encouraging Native Americans to attack colonists, to attack Americans. The British thought that by stirring up conflict on the western and northern frontiers, this would divide the Americans' fighting forces and lead to more British victory. So the British they're playing this kind of smart. The British are saying to the Indians, hey, attack American colonists, attack Americans living here, and maybe the Americans will send soldiers out to defend against those attacks so the British can get done what they want to get done militarily back on the Atlantic coast. And for a time, it's successful. All right. British attacks and encouragement exacerbated pre-existing conflicts between American colonists and Native Americans. So the British encouraging the Native Americans to attack the Americans, the British encouraging Native Americans to attack Americans is going to make the Americans even more angry and more vicious in their treatment of Native Americans. There's going to be a number of situations where American soldiers, both militia, volunteers, and Continental Army, are going to be involved in some pretty horrible, horrible attacks on Native American tribes, to include attacks on non-combatants, to include attacks on Native Americans who weren't warriors, women and children, oftentimes. In 1778, George Rogers Clark and 178 Patriot frontiersmen, including French Canadians, began a journey westward on the Ohio River to confront the British troops in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois regions. They captured the British-held Kaskaskia and Vincennes and used brutal tactics in their treatment of Native Americans, allied with the British to try to convince them to join. So the Americans were totally willing to use violence and threats to get the Native American Indians to side with them. To use a phrase that probably applies, the American soldiers oftentimes would use terror threats to encourage Native Americans. In other words, if you don't help us, we will do this, for example, to your town. We will burn your town, or we will trash your community, or we will kidnap your children and your wives. These types of things were done to solicit support from the Native Americans. Patriot forces under John Sullivan were sent to western New York. This is interesting, out near Cooperstown. How many of you have ever been to Cooperstown? Okay. Western New York near Cooperstown to confront Mohawk leader Joseph Brant. The Mohawk tribe was part of our area. Who could tell me what league the Mohawks were part of? Yeah, Iroquois, right? The Mohawk tribe leader Joseph Brant and other Iroquois forces and loyalists who had attacked frontier settlers. Sullivan's troops destroyed many Seneca and Cayuga villages, undermining the power of the Iroquois Confederacy. So, because the Iroquois fought for the British and fought with the British, the Americans looked to destroy the Iroquois nations to prevent that from happening. Again, big picture, and I don't want to get too bogged down on this right now, but for our purposes right now, I just want you thinking, this is 1778. When the Americans win the war, and I've got a question coming up for all of you. When the Americans win the war in 1783, when the treaty signed and the United States is officially independent, how do you think the relationship between the victors, the Americans, and Native Americans will play out as a result of what happened during the American Revolution? I guess what I'm asking, does the relationship that exists between the United States and the Indians during the war, does that bode well for a positive and healthy relationship between the two groups after the war? Does it? No, it doesn't. It's going to set this. It's going to set the stage for conflict, and it's going to set the stage for more and more trouble. And what's going to cause that trouble to spill over after the war ends is exactly what the Native Americans expected and exactly what the British told the Native Americans would happen. Americans after the war are going to be on a westward expansion spree across the continent, and that westward expansion is going to result in clashes and in broken treaties and Native Americans being forced to move from place to place to place. It will not bode well. It will not bode well. All right. So just to understand that Native Americans and the American victors, the situation after the war will have been made a lot worse by the conditions that existed between those two groups during the war. The Americans didn't make any friends with a lot of the Iroquois people and with a lot of the Native American tribes for things that happened during the war, and that will bleed over, that will spill over after the war. It will actually become worse because the Native Americans are not going to have the British there for what? For protection, to defend you, to fight with them. Okay? All right. Next slide, please. All right. Next slide. Any questions on that topic? All right. I want to see what I got here. We talked about the turning points. I want to make sure we're not missing any video clips. We talked about the war in the West. All right. The last part of the British plan. The last part of the British plan to win the war. There was really three tactics, and I really want you guys to get this before we go on to the next slide. The British were hoping to defeat the colonies in the north with that three-pronged attack we talked about yesterday, where they would attack from the north, they would attack from the west, and they would attack from the south. That failed. They're going to try to stir up Native Americans in the Ohio River Valley, in the area south of the Great Lakes. That doesn't work. So what's going to happen next? Plan number 3 for Britain to win the war. They are going to shift the war to the south. And if I could put this in as plain as English as I could, I would say the following. The British, when they move their soldiers to the American South, are hoping to accomplish the following. The British are hoping to encourage people in the South to join on and assist in the effort against the American army. But as they march through the South, they're hoping to basically draw loyalists to support them. They're hoping to solicit support in the South among loyalists and undecideds. And I apologize for undecideds. Make sure I spell that right. The British are hoping that by shifting their army south, they can encourage some of the loyalists and the undecideds to come to their support, making the defeat of the American army easier and quicker. And at first, it starts to work. We're talking 1778, 1779. At first, it shows some progress. It shows there's some fruits of success in the British plan. But, there's always a but when it comes to warfare. We're going to see fighting in the Carolinas. We're going to see an important battle at Kings Mountain. We're also going to see the Patriots gain momentum in the South. And one of the things, and I want you guys to understand this is vital, one of the things that's going to blow their hope out of the water is as the British start moving to the South, they begin a series of attacks. The British Army. They begin a series of brutal attacks on American civilians. They begin a series of attacks on people who are not even soldiers. And rather than gain support among independents or undecideds, and rather gain people supporting them, more and more people become what, do you think? Yeah, they look at what the British Army is doing, and they become turned off completely. Most of the people in the South who were undecided were loyal to Britain. But when Britain starts burning civilian churches, when Britain starts beating women and children in order to find out where their soldiers are hiding, a lot of Southerners are going to be openly turned off to this. And this part of the British plan is going to fail. There's a wonderful movie that highlights this. I will link a clip from the movie. When I had you all in 7th grade, did I share with you the video clip from the movie The Patriot? There was a scene in the movie. If you've seen the movie, it's always on TBS. It's always on television. The Patriot tells the story of this Southern campaign. There was a group of American patriots that worked in the swamps in South Carolina. They were American soldiers who basically were guerrilla fighters who would attack British soldiers from swamps, behind trees, up in trees, behind walls. And the Patriot movie talks about the British and their attempts to find out who these soldiers are, and in their attempts to find out where they could find these guerrilla fighters, where they could find these soldiers who were using what they felt were dirty tactics. Remember, British soldiers were used to lining up in an open field across from their enemy, and basically they could see their enemy and they could fight, and last man standing would win the army, would win the battle, right? Well, now these dirty, low-down patriots, these dirty, low-down Americans, they're using these tactics like hiding behind trees and hiding behind walls and firing from up in trees. The British looked at this tactic as dirty. They looked at it as not the characteristics of a gentleman. What? Unfair and ungentlemanly. So what the British are going to do in this movie scene that I'm almost sure I shared it with you when you were in 7th grade, the British enter a community where they know there are Patriot soldiers who have family. It's a community in South Carolina where they come into contact with wives and daughters and sons of soldiers they know or they suspect call that their home base. And what they do, but they ask the citizens to come into the church in town. And they say the British want to have a meeting. They want to discuss things with the community. So they get all the people into the church, which is the public meeting place. And who remembers what happens? They proceed to lock the church doors and burn the church to the ground with the whole community inside. And multiply this times 5, times 10, times 15 over the course of a couple of years, and what it's going to do for British support in the South, for loyalist support in the South, it's going to destroy it. When word gets out that the British are attacking civilians and the British are killing innocent women and children as a means of trying to win the war, the undecideds are going to completely turn in the opposite direction and side with the Patriots. More on this tomorrow. Thank you, girls.